Blog Talk Radio.
And tonight, following the National Geographic Channel special Finding Atlantis last week, we're going to take a look at this Atlantis situation. This time it looks like maybe we finally got it. And it's pretty close to where Plato said it ought to be. So we're devoting this hour to Atlantis in the Hermetic Western esoteric tradition. From Plato to Francis Bacon to Ignatius Donnelly and beyond. Now we'll reveal archaeological and historical information you've probably never heard. And we'll discuss why the real story of Atlantis has been suppressed. It may surprise you to learn that more ancient writers besides Plato wrote about Atlantis, and more artifacts and evidence have been recovered than you've been led to believe, especially in southern Spain, where the latest discovery has been made. We will discuss ancient Tartessos and the Minoan-Phoenician connection, and the theories of de Santa Anna and Van Decken, that's Hamlet's Mill, Charles Hapgood, the Ice Age, and the very ancient origins of our zodiac and our alphabet. Now, you may come to suspect that Atlantean architects and engineers helped to build the Great Pyramid. And, of course, how and why, we still don't quite know why they did it, and quite how they did it, but that's what we suspect. Human history is about to be overturned. So, tune in and get the latest insight on the most ancient source of what we call Western civilization. Now, this is a very, very interesting subject, and it's a subject that has important political, historic, cultural, and spiritual implications. And I want to say that, as most of you know, I have a master's degree in cultural anthropology from California State University at Northridge and received my degree in 1980. And I have done archaeology on National Geographic expeditions down in Mexico, and I don't know whether I could call myself a professional archaeologist or not, but I certainly have worked in that capacity. And I've taken graduate seminars in archaeology along with doing field work. I'm familiar with the state of American archaeology and anthropology relating to this Atlantis situation, at least as of 1980, and I've kept up with it a little bit since then. I want to tell you a story about that I think illustrates the point that we're trying to make in this show tonight. I I took a seminar in archaeology from a lady who was a very accomplished American archaeologist. And I found out when I took the seminar that I found out why American archaeologists and anthropologists, why they don't like Atlantis, and why it's almost a dirty word. In fact, sometimes we refer to it as the A word. You don't want to say the A word. If you say the A word, you're liable not to make it through graduate school. If you mention the Bimini Road, those of you who are Atlantis buffs, you know there's a submerged road out in the Bahamas that certainly appears to be man-made, and it goes on for miles and miles and miles, and it's very much a feat of ancient engineering. You don't want to mention that. You don't. This particular woman I took the seminar from, she was rabid on the subject of avoiding this sort of thing completely. In fact, what they really wanted to do in digging up these ancient civilizations, American archaeologists of her ilk, what they really wanted to do was just find out what the common people ate. When they went to the bathroom, what they, and what they threw away, their garbage. That was the concern. They were not concerned with what the priests and the wise men of these ancient civilizations were doing, whether or not any of their buildings were aligned celestially, or whether or not they had any knowledge of astronomy. That didn't concern them at all. They were concerned with what did the common people have for lunch. That was their main concern. Why is this? Well, the reason I found out is that at least in 1980, at least where I was, most of American archaeologists were Marxists. Yeah. Now, you have to understand that in the United States, archaeology and anthropology are social sciences. Now, in Europe, you could have archaeologists in classical studies. You could have archaeologists who are in the humanities. And they can hold other political views. But in social science in the United States, this is a kind of a left-wing proposition. And you find, I discovered that virtually everyone in the faculty was a Marxist. And their point of view is just as fanatical, just as superstitious, and just as fanatical as the biblical point of view. Now, if you're a biblical archaeologist and you're a devout Christian or a devout Orthodox Jew, you're not going to want to deal with very, very ancient antediluvian, in other words, before the flood. You're not going to want to. This is a sensitive area because, as you recall, the fundamental Christians and, of course, also fundamental Jewish people, they all believe that the world was created in 7 days, and I think somebody at one point figured it all out and said it was 4,223 years ago at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. That's when the world was created. And anything later than that is heresy. So a biblical archaeologist is going to have that mindset. Now, a Marxist archaeologist, on the other hand, he has another kind of mindset, not religious, but it's just as superstitious and it's just as inhibiting. His mindset is Hegelian. Everything has to evolve from the simple to the complex. And therefore, we can't have any cycles in history. We evolve from the simple to the complex. And so Marxist archaeologists, and in sort of walking hand in hand with biblical archaeologists in this particular respect, have managed to create by selective selection when they're digs, and I'll get into that in a minute. What they've managed to create is an artifice which fits the idea that back around, they said in the 1900s, the early 1900s, they said, around 4,000 years, 5,000 years ago, people started growing things, and they did before that, they just hunted and gathered and whatever, but then they started growing things, and that's when civilization got started, and the agriculture, and then they developed this, and then this developed, then they got irrigation, and then somebody developed the wheel, and then this thing went, they continued, it just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, and this idea fitted very, very well into their political and their religious perspective. And they did not want anybody to tell them that, well, wait a minute, maybe there might have been 10,000 years ago, there might have been, no, that was the Neolithic. We don't, no, that did. We know when people start, we don't know exactly whether beer came first or bread came first, but we know it all started in the Zagros Mountains, and it started at 6,000, well, as time has gone on, they keep pushing that date back farther and farther because they keep finding more and more. Now, we're now finding in Turkey, we're finding very sophisticated stone cities, 11,000 years old. and this just throws their whole theory into cocktail, but they still hang on to it. These people still have this theory about civilization and agriculture, and it all starts the way they want it, and they will not give it up because they have a religious and a political edifice created, and they also have tenure in their universities. They don't want anybody upsetting their theories. Just to give you an example of how bad this could get. Francois Bourg, the great French paleontologist, on a dig one time, and this American graduate student was down there in a culture layer about 30,000 year down culture layer, and she finds a very advanced, more than 30,000, about 50,000. She finds a very advanced Cro-Magnon spear point. I mean, this thing had been, obviously, was manufactured. In other words, it was knocked off a core and flint knapped on somebody's knee, and it was really a well-done job, very advanced for Stone Age. And she had it inside too, and she said, "Dr. Bourg, come on over, look at this." And he looks at it, and it's inside too. It's in assembly. It's right there. It's ready to be photographed. She's got it half brushed off with a brush. He grabs it, throws it over his shoulder, and says, "That's an insertion." This is what we're up against. This is one of the reasons why Atlantis has been suppressed. They don't like the political and the religious implications of it. Now, there's a dark side to that, too, because, of course, the Atlanteans, as nearly as we can tell, were Europeans. They were Cro-Magnons. They were the ancestors of us. Oh boy, us blue-eyed white people. Oh my God, we can't have that, can we? I mean, aren't we supposed to be barbarians with long matty hair that paint ourselves blue and you remember, and everybody east of Suez is all smarter than we are, and and all. Isn't that the way it's supposed to be? No, afraid it wasn't, but that's the way it's supposed to be. See, so it takes on. I hate to say this, but it takes on racial and nationalistic implications, and this is another reason why it's a hot potato, a real hot potato. But we're just about on the verge right now. We're just on the verge of finding that much as the establishment doesn't want us to find out, we're just on the verge of finding out for sure. Now, what was Atlantis? Where was it? And how old was it? And whatever. Now, Plato is our original Western source that we know about. Got to remember now, a lot of this source material is gone. Burned up in the Library of Alexandria a couple of times. The whole 9-volume history of Egypt that Manetho, that Ptolemy commissioned Manetho to write, all 9 volumes have been destroyed, all the different copies of them. We don't know. We have a couple of windows into the past, like Herodotus and Plato. And we have a few of these, and Diodorus. We have a few of these windows that we can look, and we're lucky to have them, because so much of this material has been destroyed, and so we're like blind men feeling an elephant here. You know, we just get little bits and pieces. Now, Atlantis was, according to Plato, it was a continent, very large area, outside of the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic, and it existed, according to him, 11,000 years ago. It went down. And Atlantis, according to Plato's account, was very advanced. They had metallurgy. They had advanced weaponry. They had a terrific maritime capability. They were very aggressive. And this civilization was centered in a city called Poseidonis, which was laid out like a target. Circular canals. This was a fortified harbor for commercial and naval vessels. And they were harbored inside these circular canals, inside a moat. And in the middle of this was a city and a citadel. Now, I've seen reconstructions of this, reconstructed directly from Plato's account. This was an awesome sight. I mean, according to Plato's account, elephants were used all over Atlantis and were used as domestic animals. And you look at the elephants, the size of the elephants walking around the streets, or the way Atlantis is laid out, and this is awesome. This city would today it would rival Paris. It would rival Rome. It was an awesome place. Now, Plato said that it was you sailed outside the Pillars of Hercules, and it was out there in the Atlantic. Now, said it sank in a day and a night. He doesn't specify whether it was a volcanic eruption, but it went down. It sank. And ever since then, ever since Plato, people have been speculating about it and what other people have written about it, other people besides Plato. Diodorus wrote in the 1st century after Christ. Diodorus wrote about Atlantis. And there are other accounts and fragments about Atlantis. So Plato wasn't the only one. Plato claimed he got his information from the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were very specific about this. And the Egyptians kept very, very good records, even though they've been destroyed. But we know they did. They kept very meticulous records. And so Plato's account is really, really not that much like fiction. It really isn't. And yet, in order to try to explain it away, critics have said, oh, well, it was an allegory. Oh, he was writing an allegory. And he was trying to create a myth to make a point. And no. You read this, it's a very, very detailed account and a lot of material that you really don't need for an allegory. And the detail is such
that fortunately now that we're really zeroing in on it, Plato's details becoming very, very important. Now, those of you who watched the National Geographic show last week, let me explain to you just exactly what they did. First, there's been a lot of false starts on the Atlantis thing. Thera, the island of Santorini in the Aegean, was north of Crete, as you know, and about 1200 BC, it blew its top in one of the largest and most spectacular volcanic eruptions of ancient times, which caused a tsunami that hit Crete and caused a tremendous amount of damage, and really did set the whole Minoan civilization was dealt a blow. And of course, Thera, which is part of the Minoan civilization, they were virtually wiped out at that point. And the tsunami hit, and the cloud hit Crete and did terrible damage. But they weren't wiped out. The Minoans were not wiped out. This didn't quite fit. Plus, it wasn't in the right place. It wasn't where Plato. But because everybody thought, well, it went off and it was Minoan, it was an ancient civilization, and okay, maybe this is Atlantis. Well, so that was 2 years ago. A fellow that did Avatar, Cameron, I think he put a lot of money into trying to prove that Thera and Cyprus and around in Cyprus, that's where Atlantis was. Then we've had people who have insisted that Atlantis was in the Black Sea. Now, no, not quite. However, there's a thing here that we have to deal with, and this will explain a lot about Atlantis and a lot about how this Atlantean civilization that we know existed, how it came about. Now, you all remember that back around 15,000 years ago, we had an ice age. Yeah, and huge amount of ice all up in the North Pole and all around that area, over Greenland. And this ice, this great big glacier, it contained a huge amount of water, and it stretched all the way down into the middle of Europe. And it sucked up so much water that the sea level during that ice age was 200 feet lower than it is today. Think about that now. 200 feet lower, okay? So, this went on for thousands of years now. It was 200 feet lower. In other words, you could walk from Dublin to Paris and never get your feet wet. So the map's entirely different. Now, that means that out there in the Atlantic, around the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, around where the Azores Islands are, and there's a great big island. Around with it now, they're just the Azores, just peaks out there. And here's this great big huge island. Okay, yeah, this nice, the climate's nice and everything else. Now, just to be conservative here, because I know that those of you who are listening, you know about Casey and, of course, all the idea that all the Atlanteans had crystal ray guns and they had spaceships and they had all flying saucers and genetic engineering and all that kind of stuff, and we can really go on and on and on about all of that. Well, maybe they did. I don't know. Maybe there's some evidence that they might have, because they were making maps during that period. They were making maps of the Earth that looked like they had to be made with aerial photography. And they've come down to us. Charles Hapgood's done a lot of research on that, and he's a very, very astute scientist. And so we, those of you who want to believe Casey, and even if you want to believe my friend Dick Shaver, okay, I'll entertain that. I'll entertain it. I will. I will. I'm not going to try to push it, because remember now, I have an MA in cultural anthropology, so I have to be conservative. I got to be conservative. Okay, so I'm going to be conservative. Now, let me tell you something. There was, conservative as I'm going to be, there's a great big island right out there where the Azores are. I mean, it's a big one. Oh, boy, it's big. That's right where Plato said it was. Okay, so we got this big island out there, and all you need, people, to have civilization, all you need is a steady food supply at one point. This is conservative anthropology now. A steady food, you don't need agriculture. You don't need to grow a damn thing. Unless you want to go out and pick it. You don't. All you need is a steady food supply at one point. You got a good salmon run, you can have civilization. And that's what they had. Boy, they ate a lot of salmon because it's a real good salmon run running right down through there. It is now and probably was then. So this was a maritime culture. Now, we know it was. And these people, these are the Cro-Magnons. These people are 6 foot tall. They're just, if you met one of them on the street, and he was, you know, and he had a haircut and was wearing a 3-piece suit, you'd think he was, you know, your next door neighbor. I mean, these people were, if you got a next door neighbor that's 6 feet tall and looks like he could play football, yeah. These were our ancestors, and they had a civilization. And I'm not, I remember now, I'm not talking about the flying saucers, and I'm not talking about the Anunnaki, and I'm not talking about great crystals or anything like that. I'm just telling you straight, flat-out anthropology. They were a very highly advanced maritime culture, and if they got a steady food supply at one point, they can have cities, they can have specialization, they can have a language, they can look up at the sky, and they can have a zodiac, and they can have, and they did all these things. How do we know that? Well, we found some very interesting artifacts on the Azores, and that's been suppressed. They found a statue up at the top of a mountain on the Azores, and a bronze man on a horse that was almost the size of Peter the Great in St. Petersburg. And those of you who are in St. Petersburg, you know, you go down to Senate Square, you look at the Peter the Great on top of that boulder. Well, this was like it was, there was this Atlantean warrior on top of this bronze horse, way up on top of a mountain in the Azores, and unfortunately, when they tried to get it down for the King of Portugal, and they broke the darn thing, and all that was left was his head and one arm, and then somehow or other that disappeared, but we know that they have it. They had caves, they had alphabet, we don't know what it says, and this kept up. Phoenician coins from much, much later, so there was still contact with all of this. Now, that's the Azores. And the Canaries, near the coast, step pyramids, and a race of people very much like our ancestors, which had degenerated to the point where they were something like out of an Edgar Rice Burroughs story, you know, the white savages. And they're gone now. But now, remember, in southern France and in Spain, back 30,000 years ago, the progenitors of these people who became highly civilized by 15,000 years ago, they were really civilized, but 30,000 years ago, they were doing very sophisticated cave paintings in France and southern Spain, making very sophisticated stone tools, and so they were moving toward this civilization. Now, where it is centered, and where it overwhelming evidence has it that the southern coast of Spain and off all the way that shelf back 500 BC, and we have maps to prove this. That whole area in there on the Guadalquivir River, where Atlantis is now, the last Atlantis, apparently has been found. That was all a large bay, but at the time it was built, the time the city was built, it was land. Now, that particular city that has just been discovered, the one that they're showing on the National Geographic Channel, that particular city is probably the last Atlantis. There were several of them before that. They built these cities like Poseidonis on a plan, and they built several of them. How do we know this? Well, because Carthage, and the Phoenicians, by the way, are the heirs to the Atlanteans, and that's pretty obvious. The Phoenicians, mysterious people that they are, were a blend of the Canaanites and the so-called sea people, the Philistines. You know, the one that Samson got into and pulled down the temple of Dagon. Well, Dagon, of course, was the Philistine and a Canaanite god. And the Philistines, the sea people, and they with the Phoenicians. And, of course, this was around the time of the Trojan War that this occurred. So it's much, much later. But the city of Carthage, which was a Phoenician city right on the North African coast, was built exactly like on the plan of Poseidonis. And Hiram of Tyre, good old Hiram of Tyre, who helped King Solomon build the temple and all that, he tried to do the same thing at Tyre. Tyre was just a couple of rocks out in the water. And Hiram said, oh, well, we're going to get out there and we're going to build a city. We're going to have several. So he tried. But he went along, with the lay of the land the way it was and built it as close to an Atlantis as he could. That's the way the Phoenicians, who were the heirs of Atlantis, that's the way they built their cities. They tried to build them to make islands out of them, like Poseidonis. Now, how do we know, or can we be very, very sure that what we've got right now is definitely Atlantean? Now, I'm not saying it was the original, because there have been several. Atlantis was going ever since you had that big island out there during the Ice Age, 15,000 years ago. They were started then, but what happened was that they were maritime, and they built these cities like in this target, this maze-like plan that they did, do these fortified nautical naval base kind of cities. They did this. Now, they had one just south of the Atlantis that we now have found right under. That's right under the. If you people are looking at the map, that's right under the Portuguese border. Right down from the Portuguese border, there's the Guadalquivir River, and it's the delta that river. That's where this is. It's 50 feet under the mud. It's going to be a terrific job to excavate it because they'll have to do as much pumping as they do digging. But it's you can tell from ground radar and from satellite views and everything else, it's laid out just on the Atlantis pattern. Now, right south of there was the mysterious, and I think also Atlantean, and a lot of people agree with this, city of Tartessos, which is mentioned in the Bible as Tarshish in Genesis. Now, Tartessos was the last, that was in between Poseidonis on the right below Portugal, and then there's Tartessos, and then inside the Pillars of Hercules there was Carthage. These are these various cities that they built on this plan. Now, Tartessos, the river right down where Cadiz is today, where the city of Cadiz is, Tartessos was all the way back to, as far as we know, back to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, it was an Atlantean port. And these people, it appears that the Atlanteans were the introducers of bronze. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the Bronze Age. Oh, when did the Bronze Age start? Well, we think or we say that the Bronze Age started about 5,000 years ago. Right? Well, maybe so. Maybe. But consider this. 5,000 years is about as long as bronze is going to last. So, if you went and tried to dig up something bronze 6,000 years ago, you might not find anything. So maybe the Bronze Age was going for a while longer. But regardless of that, it's probable that the Atlanteans were the inventors and the entrepreneurs of bronze implements. Now, bronze, in case you don't know, I will tell you that bronze is a very difficult metal to you have to have a lot of skill, and you have to have very good grade copper. And bronze is an alloy of copper and nickel and zinc, tin, copper, tin, and zinc, and it's very difficult to make. It requires skill, and it requires a very good grade of copper. But once you have it, and you know how to do it, bronze, quite frankly, is as good or better than steel. There are still some areas where bronze blades and bronze edge blades and whatever are actually superior and considered superior to steel. Bronze is an incredible metal, and it a bronze sword, if properly made, a bronze sword could cut through a copper blade like it was a piece of cardboard. You had bronze weapons, and it was almost like having laser weapons today. I mean, it made Atlantis into a superpower. But they did sell it, and they sold it, and they traded it all over the ancient world. Now, Frank Joseph, who is a researcher on Atlantis and gathered a lot of information on it, he suspects that because they did so much of this, that they were getting their copper all the way from the Great Lakes of Michigan, a great big copper deposit there, and he thinks that's where they were bringing it in. He might be right, but because they were very, very good sailors, and they were all over the area. So it's possible, but then Britain, you see, they didn't have to go all the way to the United States to get it. Southern Spain has lots of copper deposits, and Britain has the tin. So there you are, right there. They started this, and this brought civilization through the Mediterranean. The ruins in the Mediterranean, the ancient ruins in Britain and in Ireland, and the chamber tombs that go down toward the water in France and in Spain, these are very, very, very ancient. Some of these structures are older than the pyramids of Egypt. The Hypogeum on Malta, this fantastic, what they call Cyclopean, or is it Cyclopean? Cyclopean or Cyclopean architecture. Anyway, it comes from Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Or was he the Cyclops? I don't know. Anyway, it means big stones. I mean, really big stones. It is so big you wonder how they ever got them, how they ever got one on top of the other. And Malta, oh, God, Lord, nobody knows how old those ruins are. So what I'm saying here is that what we call civilization comes from the west and goes eastward, and not necessarily from the east and goes west. And that's something, of course, that the religious establishment, the political establishment, the social science establishment they just plain don't want to face. And I want to face it. Now, how does this finally get revealed? How did we finally come to these conclusions? Well, a long story on that. Atlantis sort of remained something of myth and legend, and Plato, of course, was considered the authority, and that all the way through up until Francis Bacon, the British philosopher in the Renaissance, wrote a book called The New Atlantis, and he used Atlantis again as an allegory, as a social allegory, and he revived the Atlantis theme, and that has some influence on the formation of our good old fraternity, the Masons, and Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, and that raised a little bit of interest in the old Atlantis theory. So that kind of that was that particular aspect of it. And then as we began to do serious archaeology, and Schliemann went out and discovered that Troy wasn't a myth; it was really there, and we began to do some serious archaeology in the 1840s, 1850s, and the Rosetta Stone was translated, of course, as we began digging around, and at that point, as we began to question the biblical aspect of things and whatever, an American scholar and all-around man, politician and scholar and adventurer and everything else, Ignatius Donnelly. Ignatius Donnelly wrote the first really serious study of Atlantis, and this was published in 1882, and it was called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Now, I happen to be looking at a copy of it here that is a modern revised edition edited by one of Donnelly's followers, Edgerton Sykes, who has also written. Ignatius Donnelly was followed in the 1920s by Lewis Spence. Lewis Spence wrote a very, very good book called The History of Atlantis, which is even more information and whatever. And then Edgerton Sykes took over from Lewis Spence, and Edgerton Sykes edited Donnelly's book. Donnelly's book is still really excellent because what Donnelly does is he goes over all of the evidence for Atlantis, and you will be surprised to find out just how much was really uncovered in Spain that just plain got ignored. I mean, this whole thing down on the Spanish coast, which is right outside the Pillars of Hercules, and this is where it really would have gotten going. All there was so much that was recovered. There was a lady archaeologist who uncovered a sort of outlying city on the higher ground, based upon the model of Atlantis, and they show that by the way, in the National Geographic. We should all go take a look after you listen to this show. Go take a look. YouTube has the National Geographic Finding Atlantis. So after you watch this show, or listen to this show, you go and take a look at that, because that will show you the beautiful job that this lady archaeologist did recovering this city, and we'll show you the Atlantean logo with the swordsman there guarding the labyrinth, of Atlantis and all that. But what they did not show you, was the Lady of Elche, and this is a beautiful Atlantean priestess, a beautiful, beautiful statue of an Atlantean priestess, and this is something that will just make a believer out of you. I mean, when you see this, you will become a believer. And also, they've uncovered. Of course, they even said they got a little Astarte statuette that they found on the scene. Well, that's nice, but also I would like to mention that years ago, down in Tartessos, which of course is a later version of Poseidonus, down in Tartessos, a ring was dredged up. You got to remember now, these are in river deltas, and these towns, both Tartessos and this new find, are both under 50 feet of mud, which means that for an archaeology job, this is going to be really tough. This means as much of a pumping job as it is an excavation, and that's really, really going to be tough. So what they dredged up down in Tartessos was a gold ring that had an alphabetic inscription. Yeah, the alphabet. Now, mentioning that, I'm gonna show Zandria here an even better one of the Atlantean priestess there, which I think we'll put on that one. We ought to put that one on the website. Yeah, we scan that one. This Lady of Elche is something that you really have to see. Yeah, and the I want to get into now two things that I said in the abstract that we would cover. I want to get into the alphabet and the zodiac. Now, as you all know, the Phoenicians, who were heirs of Atlantis, the Phoenicians are credited with the alphabet. Nobody knows quite when, or how they did it, but they're credited with it. But back in the 1920s, in southern France, in an area called Groissel, a farmer uncovered, when he was plowing his field, uncovered a cache of clay tablets with what looked like Phoenician writing on them. It looked like alphabetic, definitely alphabetic inscriptions, very, very old. And he immediately reported it to the French Academy, and the archaeologist who first discovered it was really, or first on the scene, was really, really impressed, and then it became a political nightmare. And because this young archaeologist had supposedly discovered the farmer had put him on, then he and his jealous colleague, who was higher in the French Academy, tried to discredit him, and the whole thing turned into a real nightmare. And finally, the only way that the French Academy could resolve it was to agree that they were fake, but they couldn't prove that they were fake. They just said, well, we don't credit them, and that kept the old professor happy, and the young professor just had to eat crow, and that was the end of that. Now, that's all being re-examined at this point. That's all been re-examined, and we're reassessing the whole Groissel find. It's a very, very strong possibility, especially with the Tartessos ring and this Groissel find and all that the alphabet is a great deal older. It's a great deal older than the Phoenician version, circa 1500 BC. It probably, I would just imagine that the alphabet, the Atlantean alphabet, probably is at least 8,000 years old. But I can't prove that. That's just a guess. Now, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the zodiac. I mentioned here in the abstract that we would discuss the theories of de Santa Anna and von Deckend and Charles Hapgood in the Ice Age. Okay? Now, these kind of work together. Charles Hapgood, his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, You remember, those of you who've seen Beyond Lemuria, you remember we scanned some very interesting graphics from this and discussed it in our documentary. Charles Hapgood established scientifically and with, I think, overwhelming evidence that there was certainly a high-level civilization that was extant when the water level was down 200 feet lower. That would be about 15,000 years ago. And around that time, or even earlier, it's very, very probable that our Western zodiac was first conceived and laid out. The reason is this. The Atlanteans worshipped the bull, and they carried this bull worship all the way through the Minoan. As you know, the Minoans had the sacred bull dance and all this business, and the Spanish still have the bullfight, and then the Canaanites have the great old father god of the Canaanites, whose son was Moses Shaphe, of course. The great old father god was called Bull El. Yeah, so there's a lot of bull going on here, and now where does the zodiac start? It starts right in Aldebaran, right in the bullseye. That's where it starts. And it didn't start 4,200 years ago. It started in the previous age. Yeah, get your calculators and figure that one out. Now, De Santa Anna, who is a professor of scientific history at MIT, and his associate, Hertha von Decken, an anthropologist, they came up with a magisterial treatise called Hamlet's Mill back about 1970. And what they established in Hamlet's Mill is that the antediluvian world, in other words, this civilization that Hapgood's talking about, this Ice Age civilization, that these people were just as intelligent and just as astute in their observations of the heavens as we are today. They just didn't have our optical and electronic equipment, but they understood the process of the precession of the equinoxes. They understood all of this, and they laid out their mythology and their concept of the North Star, and the Great Bear defining the seasons. All of this was very, very, very ancient and came down to us. And De Santa Anna and von Decken tried to do this in as subtle and as pervasive and persuasive a manner as possible without just coming out and shouting the A word, because naturally at that time, and still is, the A word, as I said, is a four-letter word. You don't want to say it. So they were, but this book of theirs, Hamlet's Mill, will really, really convince you that our Ice Age progenitors really, really were very intelligent, very wise people. And they gave us the zodiac. Now, at least our Western version of it. Now, that zodiac and the alphabet are very, very important aspects of our civilization. And in case you're wondering about the archaeological backup on this, take a look at Stonehenge and all of the alignments and the subtleties involved in Stonehenge. And then be aware that we just dug up just recently a enamel plate in Northern Europe that's very, very, very old, showing star systems and relationships. These our ancestors were not the howling barbarians that some people would like you to think. Now, so remember also that the Romans ruthlessly destroyed the Druids' library on that island off the coast of Wales back after Julius Caesar took over Britain. That was one of the things that they wanted to do. They wanted to destroy all of that material. They did. And all the Druids on the island died, including their library was completely destroyed. So we don't really know what it was that passed out. Now, and yet, it begins to look like maybe we're on the verge of really recovering all of that. And when I said the Great Pyramid, I said here that Atlantean architects and engineers built the Great Pyramid. Now, I don't mean to say that the Egyptians didn't have anything to do with it. No, of course they did. The Egyptians built it. But the engineers, the architects, and the supervising engineers, I believe, were Atlantean. And the reason I think most serious people that look at this thing seriously would tend to believe or tend to agree with me. And the reason for that is this: the ancient Egyptians at that time just simply did not have the engineering skill to do something like that. They might have been able to have the labor. They would provide the labor. They could provide the will and the way and the impetus and all. But this had to be, that structure is just, it's laid out so precisely and it's laid out so magnificently arranged that this would require. And I think it's there. Now, I said we don't know why they built it. Some people say it's a great generator. Some people say, and then the most conservatives say, oh, well, they used it to align after the flood, after the Nile flood. They could tell they could spot all the, or use trigonometry to lay out the plots for farming. And that's a very conservative way to look at it. But you look at those shafts and chambers and the way that the stellar alignments, the whole business. I mean, it is something that required a tremendous amount of sophistication. So it's very, very probable that these engineers from Atlantis were called in to help build that. Now, I want to make sure that you understand that I'm not what you call a diffusionist. I don't think that everything has to come from Atlantis, or everything has to come from the Anunnaki, or that human beings are very capable of independently by themselves. So, but Atlantis, I'm afraid, I think Atlantis is really there, and I think we've really found it. Okay, next week we're going to have another show, and we'll have a new guest if we can possibly find one that'll be very, very interesting. So be sure to tune in. We'll see you next week, and good magic.